Emma never believed in fate until a single surgery changed her life forever. When she wakes up, she finds out her doctor is none other than Adrian Knight, a young billionaire surgeon with a past as mysterious as his piercing gaze. What starts as treatment soon turns into a love story beyond imagination. Emma Sullivan had always been the kind of girl who went unnoticed. She wasn't the loudest in the room, nor the one who drew people in with an effortless smile. She lived in the quiet corners of life, tucked away between the pages of books, where she felt safe. Stories had always been her escape, romances where love found the most unexpected souls, where heroines with trembling hearts were swept away by men who saw beyond their silence. But real life wasn't a novel. Real life was full of cold stares, judgmental glances, and a kind of exposure Emma dreaded. That was why she built walls. That was why she avoided situations that forced her out of her comfort zone. And that was exactly why she had spent the past 6 months ignoring the dull, persistent pain in her abdomen. At first, it had been nothing, a discomfort she had brushed aside like an unwanted thought, but as time passed, it grew worse, sharp and relentless, a reminder that she couldn't keep pretending everything was fine. The pain had started stealing her sleep, making her shift uncomfortably in bed, clutching her stomach, and hoping it would just disappear. But it didn't. And now, sitting in the dimly lit library where she worked, Emma found herself trapped between two fears, the fear of what could be wrong with her, and the fear of seeing a doctor. She flinched when a sharp voice cut through her thoughts. Emma. She turned to find Lily, her best friend, standing with her arms crossed, an unmistakable look of determination in her eyes. Emma sighed. I know what you're going to say. Good, then I don't have to waste time saying it. Lily marched over, plopping into the chair across from her. You need to go to a doctor, and before you try to argue, I already made an appointment for you. Emma's heart stuttered. What? You heard me. Panic bloomed in her chest. Lily, you can't just I can, and I did. Lily's voice softened. Emma, you can't keep living like this. You're in pain, you're scared, but ignoring it won't make it go away. Emma bit her lip, her fingers tightening around the book in her lap. It's not that simple. I know it's not, Lily admitted. I know how hard this is for you, but don't you think you deserve to be healthy, to take care of yourself the way you deserve? Emma swallowed, her throat tight. She hated this feeling, the vulnerability, the fear of being examined, of being exposed. The last time she had seen a doctor for something personal, she had felt dismissed, rushed, like just another patient on a long list. She hesitated. I don't know if I can do it. Lily reached across the table, placing a hand over Emma's. That's why I found someone good, someone who actually cares about his patients. His name is Dr. Adrian Blackwood. He's young, brilliant, and Emma's stomach dropped. Young? Lily blinked. Yeah, Emma shook her head. No. I was hoping for someone older, someone who won't. She trailed off, heat creeping up her neck. Lily's lips twitched. Someone who won't make you feel self-conscious. Emma groaned, covering her face. Exactly. Lily squeezed her hand. Emma, I promise, Dr. Blackwood is different. He's not just good at what he does. He's kind. He makes people feel safe. And if you don't feel comfortable with him, you don't have to go back. But you have to try. Emma took a shaky breath, the weight of her fears pressing against her chest. She had spent so much of her life hiding, avoiding, running from things that scared her. But deep down, she knew Lily was right. If she didn't face this now, when would she? With her heart pounding, she nodded. Okay, Lily beamed. Good, because your appointment is tomorrow. Emma's eyes widened. Tomorrow. Lily grinned unapologetically. No time to back out. Emma groaned again, but this time, there was a small nervous smile hiding behind it. She had no idea that this decision, this one act of bravery, was about to change her life forever. because tomorrow she would walk into a doctor's office, expecting only fear and discomfort, and instead she would meet the man who would rewrite every page of her story. The next morning, Emma Sullivan stood frozen outside Blackwood Medical Center, her heart pounding violently in her chest. The massive glass building gleamed under the golden morning sun, its sleek, modern architecture exuding sophistication. The polished golden letters spelling out the hospital's name shimmered, as if mocking her nervousness. Her hands trembled as she clutched her purse strap, her knuckles turning white. Every fiber of her being screamed at her to turn around, to run back to the comfort of her small apartment, and pretend this appointment didn't exist. But she knew she couldn't. The pain in her abdomen had worsened over the past few days, making sleep difficult, making normal tasks unbearable. She had already delayed this for too long. She took a shaky breath. Just go inside, Emma. It's just an appointment. In and out. You'll be fine. Emma. She jerked at the sound of Lily's voice, snapping out of her swirling thoughts. Her best friend jogged toward her, her long red hair bouncing as she came to a stop. Lily placed her hands on her hips, slightly breathless. Tell me you haven't been standing here debating an escape plan. Emma's lips parted, but no words came out. Lily groaned. Emma, she grabbed her hand gently. You've made it this far. Come on, don't back out now. Emma swallowed hard. I don't think I can do this. Lily sighed, giving her a knowing look. You can, and you will. I know this is hard for you, but you have to stop letting fear control your life. Emma clenched her jaw. It's not just fear. She hesitated, her face burning. I hate the idea of being vulnerable. I hate doctors. I hate feeling exposed. Lily's expression softened. I get that. I do. But you need to take care of yourself, Emma. Emma inhaled shakily, her chest tightening. Lily squeezed her hand. Look, I did some research on Dr. Adrian Blackwood last night. He's not just some random doctor. He's the best. Women travel from all over to see him. He's known for being patient, kind, and professional, and, also for being insanely attractive. Emma snapped her head up. Lily laughed. What? Just thought I'd mention it. Emma groaned, her face heating. That does not make this better. Lily smirked. Maybe not, but at least you'll have a pleasant view while he saves your life. Emma wanted to argue, but her stomach twisted painfully, cutting her off. She winced, pressing a hand to her side. Lily's amusement faded instantly. See, you need this. No more stalling. Emma let out a shaky breath and nodded. Okay, let's go. Lily grinned. That's my girl. With a final reluctant step, Emma pushed open the glass doors and entered. A clinic unlike any other. The moment she stepped inside, she was caught off guard. Instead of the sterile, cold, white-walled clinics she had expected, Blackwood Medical Center felt more like a five-star hotel. The air carried a subtle, soothing scent of lavender, and the waiting area was nothing like the stiff plastic chairs she had dreaded. Instead, luxurious cream-colored sofas lined the room, accented with golden coffee tables, holding delicate vases of fresh white roses. Everything here screamed exclusivity and money. Emma swallowed hard. Are we in a hospital or a billionaire's mansion? Lily smirked. I told you, doctor. Blackwood is not your average doctor. Emma hesitated, her nerves flaring again. This place felt too upscale, too high class. She was just an ordinary woman, a simple library assistant. She didn't belong in a place like this. What if they treated her differently? What if they looked down on her? Before she could second-guess herself, the receptionist, a woman in a crisp, stylish uniform, smiled warmly. Miss Sullivan. Emma blinked. Ah yes. The woman's smile widened. Welcome. Dr. Blackwood is expecting you. Please follow me. Emma stiffened. Already. Lily nudged her. You got this. Emma forced her feet to move, following the receptionist down a pristine hallway, her heart hammering in her chest. The first meeting, the hallway opened up to a private consultation room, bathed in soft, natural light. Emma barely had time to take in the elegant decor before she heard the smooth, deep voice that made her freeze. Miss Sullivan." Her breath caught in her throat as she turned and nearly forgot how to breathe. Standing near the examination table was a man who could not, look like a regular doctor. Dr. Adrian Blackwood was young, too young, and devastatingly handsome. He was tall, broad-shouldered, and effortlessly confident. His jet-black hair was neatly styled, a few strands falling onto his forehead in an infuriatingly perfect way. His striking, icy blue eyes were sharp yet kind, as if he could see straight through her, peeling away every wall she had ever built. He was dressed in a crisp white coat over a charcoal gray dress shirt, the top button undone just enough to hint at the toned physique beneath. He looked less like a doctor, and more like a billionaire CEO, who had casually stepped into a hospital for the day. Emma's entire body went stiff. "Oh no, Miss Sullivan," he repeated, his voice smooth and professional, yet strangely warm. "It's a pleasure to meet you." Emma barely managed to nod, her throat tightening. This was a disaster. She had been hoping for an older, distant doctor, someone clinical and detached, not a young, ridiculously attractive man who had the kind of presence that made her stomach flip. He gestured toward the chair across from him. "Please, have a seat." Emma hesitated, then slowly lowered herself into the chair, feeling painfully aware of herself. Dr. Blackwood sat across from her, folding his hands on the desk, studying her with quiet intensity. "I understand you've been experiencing abdominal pain for quite some time," he said gently. "Can you tell me more about your symptoms?" Emma swallowed. I've had discomfort for a few months now. At first it wasn't too bad, but lately, it's been getting worse. Sharp pains, especially at night." Dr. Blackwood nodded, his gaze steady, reassuring. "Thank you for sharing that with me. I know it's not easy to talk about personal health issues." Emma glanced away, her face warm. "Yeah, it's not." He smiled slightly. "You're not alone, Emma. A lot of women feel this way. But I promise, my job isn't just to treat you, it's to make sure you feel safe and comfortable here." Emma's heart skipped a beat at the way he said her name, like he was trying to put her at ease. For the first time since stepping into the clinic, she felt a flicker of something unexpected. Maybe this won't be as bad as I thought. But little did she know, this appointment was just the beginning of something far greater than she had ever imagined. Emma's hands were clenched together in her lap, her fingers twisting anxiously as she tried to calm the erratic rhythm of her heart. The reality of the situation had finally set in. She was sitting in a private consultation room, alone with the most attractive man she had ever seen, discussing one of the most vulnerable aspects of her health. Dr. Adrian Blackwood, with his composed expression and striking blue eyes, radiated confidence and quiet authority. But there was something else beneath the surface, an unusual gentleness, an unspoken understanding that made Emma feel slightly less like she wanted to disappear into the floor. Still, her nerves refused to settle. "Emma," his smooth voice broke through her thoughts, making her chest tighten. "I want you to know that you're in complete control here. If at any point you feel uncomfortable, just tell me, and we'll proceed at your pace." Her throat was dry. "Oh, okay," he nodded, his gaze steady. "Before we move forward, I'd like to conduct an initial examination to understand what might be causing your discomfort. Are you okay with that?" Emma hesitated, heat creeping up her neck. The thought of an examination was mortifying, but she had come this far. Backing out now would mean prolonging her pain. With a deep, shaky breath, she nodded. Yes, I understand." Dr. Blackwood gave her an encouraging smile. "Good, let's take it one step at a time." The examination room. The air felt too thick as Emma stepped into the adjoining examination room. Unlike the grand, luxurious waiting area, this room was modern and clinical. Pristine white walls, neatly organized medical instruments, and an unmistakable scent of antiseptic. A soft panic curled in her stomach as she perched on the edge of the padded examination table, her body rigid. Dr. Blackwood adjusted his gloves, his movements efficient yet graceful. "Emma, I know this isn't easy," he said,
his tone softer than before. But I promise, my only focus is your health. She nodded quickly, avoiding his piercing gaze. I know. He studied her for a moment, before reaching for a blanket and handing it to her. I'll step outside while you change into the examination gown. Take your time. She stared at the soft fabric in her hands, her fingers trembling slightly. It was such a small gesture, yet it meant everything. Thank you, she murmured. He inclined his head. I'll be right back. As the door clicked shut behind him, Emma let out a breath she hadn't realized she was holding. This was really happening. The softest touch. Minutes later, she was lying back on the examination table, covered with the provided blanket. Her heart pounded against her ribs as Dr. Blackwood re-entered, his expression as calm as ever. Are you comfortable? He asked. She gave a stiff nod. As much as I can be. The corner of his mouth lifted in a subtle, reassuring smile. I understand. Emma had expected the worst: clinical detachment, awkward questions, the overwhelming sense of vulnerability that came with being examined. But Adrian was different. His touch was feather-light as he conducted the examination, his fingertips precise yet careful, as if he were afraid of causing her any discomfort. Every movement was slow, deliberate, and somehow reassuring. Let me know if anything hurts, he said gently. Emma swallowed, trying to focus on anything other than the warmth of his hands, the deep timbre of his voice, the way his presence was somehow both intimidating and calming. And then, a sharp pain shot through her lower abdomen. She flinched, a soft gasp escaping her lips. Adrian immediately stopped, his gaze snapping up to hers. That hurt, she nodded, her breathing uneven. His expression darkened with concern. I'm sorry, I'll be as gentle as possible. Emma bit her lip, her cheeks heating. It's okay, I think I just wasn't expecting it. His brows furrowed slightly, his thumb absently tracing a light, soothing circle over her skin. It was such a small, unconscious action, yet the warmth of it sent a shiver up her spine. He was too close. His touch, his scent, a mix of clean linen and something undeniably masculine, was making it impossible to think straight. She had never been this affected by anyone before. Emma had spent years building walls around her heart, avoiding attachments, steering clear of relationships that could make her feel exposed. Yet here she was, completely at the mercy of a man she had only just met, and it terrified her. But what terrified her even more was the way her heart didn't want to resist him. The diagnosis that changed everything. The examination didn't last long, but by the time it was over, Emma was completely drained. Adrian removed his gloves, his features unusually tense as he scribbled down notes. Emma sat up slowly, clutching the blanket tightly around herself. So, what do you think? He exhaled, his gaze meeting hers with a new intensity. I have a strong suspicion that you have ovarian cysts, he said gently. They're fairly common, but in your case the symptoms suggest they might be large or possibly causing complication. Emma's stomach twisted. Ovarian cysts, he nodded. We'll need to confirm with an ultrasound, but if I'm right, it might explain the pain you've been experiencing. Her fingers tightened around the blanket. Is it serious? Adrian hesitated, then softened. It depends on their size and type. Some cysts resolve on their own, but others require intervention. Emma's pulse quickened. Intervention. His expression remained unreadable. Surgery might be necessary. A cold wave of fear washed over her. Surgery. The word alone made her dizzy. Adrian noticed the shift in her expression and immediately leaned forward, his voice dropping to a soothing murmur. Emma, I know this sounds overwhelming, but I promise you're in good hands. I will personally make sure you receive the best care. She stared at him, something unspoken passing between them. The way he said it, I will personally make sure, it wasn't just a doctor speaking to his patient. There was something deeper, something warmer in his tone. For the first time in a long time, Emma felt safe, a moment neither of them expected. She exhaled shakily. I don't like the idea of surgery. I know, Adrian said softly, but you don't have to go through this alone. Emma met his gaze, and for a brief, breathless moment, the air between them shifted. It was subtle, the way his eyes softened when they met hers, the way his voice dipped just slightly when he spoke her name. There was an undeniable pull, a quiet, unspoken connection. Neither of them had anticipated, and Emma wasn't sure whether to be terrified or captivated. One thing was certain. This was just the beginning. Emma sat frozen, her heart drumming wildly against her ribs. The word surgery echoed in her mind like a distant thunderclap. She had always been scared of hospitals, of the cold, sterile walls, and the overwhelming helplessness that came with being under someone else's care. And now, here she was, facing the terrifying possibility of an operation that she never thought she would need. Her fingers clenched around the blanket draped over her lap, her knuckles turning white. Adrian was still watching her, his blue eyes unreadable, but there was a certain softness in his gaze, a kind of quiet reassurance that told her she wasn't alone. But she still felt alone, utterly, completely alone. "I don't know if I can do this," she whispered, her voice trembling. Adrian leaned forward, resting his arms on the desk in front of him. The room was quiet, except for the distant hum of medical equipment, the soft ticking of the clock on the wall. "You don't have to decide right now," he said gently. "We'll take it step by step. First we confirm with an ultrasound, then we discuss all your options. Surgery is only a last resort." She swallowed hard, nodding, but her body was still stiff, still drowning in a whirlpool of emotions she couldn't escape. Adrian sighed, running a hand through his thick dark hair. "Emma," his voice was softer now, more personal, "I know you're scared." Her breath hitched. She wasn't used to this, to people recognizing her fear, to people seeing her. She had spent years perfecting the art of fading into the background, of pretending she was fine, even when she wasn't. But somehow, Adrian saw right through her. "I've been alone for a long time," she admitted, in a shaky voice. "I don't have anyone to go through this with." Adrian's jaw tightened slightly, as if her words hit him deeper than she expected. "You're not alone," he said firmly. "Not anymore." She looked up at him, startled. There was something about the way he said it, like a promise, like an unspoken vow, that he wouldn't let her go through this without him by her side. And that scared her, even more than the surgery, because letting someone in meant giving them the power to hurt her. An unplanned ride home. By the time they finished discussing the next steps, it was already dark outside. The city lights flickered in the distance, casting a soft glow over the hospital's glass windows. Emma wrapped her arms around herself as she stepped out into the cool night air, her mind still spinning. She had just taken a few steps toward the bus stop when a deep voice called after her. "Emma, wait." She turned, and there he was, Dr. Adrian Blackwood, no longer just her doctor, but something else, something more personal now. He had removed his white coat, now dressed in a simple black button. The sleeves rolled up to his forearms, revealing strong, veined hands. Her breath caught. Why did he have to look like that? "Where are you going?" he asked, walking up to her. "I take the bus," she mumbled, suddenly feeling small under his intense gaze. His brows furrowed. "At this hour?" She nodded, trying to avoid his piercing stare. Adrian sighed. "Emma, it's late. Let me drive you home." Her head snapped up. "What? I'm not letting you take the bus alone at night," he said, his voice laced with quiet authority. Emma hesitated. "I don't want to be a burden." "You're not." His tone left no room for argument. "Come on." She chewed on her lip, hesitating for another moment, before finally nodding. "Oh, okay." As they walked to his sleek black car, Emma couldn't shake the odd feeling in her chest. A doctor offering to drive his patient home wasn't normal, was it? And yet, here they were. The drive that changed everything. The car was silent, except for the soft hum of the engine. Emma sat stiffly in the passenger seat, stealing glances at Adrian from the corner of her eye. He looked different outside of the hospital, more relaxed, more like a man, rather than just a doctor. His fingers tapped lightly on the steering wheel as he drove, his eyes focused on the road, and yet there was tension in the air between them, a kind of unspoken electricity that neither of them wanted to acknowledge. She cleared her throat. You didn't have to do this. He glanced at her. I know. Her fingers twisted in her lap. Then why did you? A ghost of a smile played on his lips. Because I wanted to. Emma's stomach flipped. She had no response to that. Silence filled the car once more, but this time it wasn't awkward. It was heavy, filled with things neither of them were saying. Finally, Adrian spoke again, his voice quieter this time. You remind me of someone I used to know. Emma turned to him, her brows knitting together. Who? His jaw tensed, as if he was debating whether or not to tell her. But then he sighed. My sister. Emma blinked. Your sister. She was sick for a long time, he admitted. She didn't tell anyone. She kept it to herself, acted like she could handle it alone. He exhaled, shaking his head. By the time she finally let me help her, it was almost too late. Emma's chest tightened. I'm so sorry. Adrian gave her a small sad smile. She's okay now, but I promised myself I wouldn't let anyone else go through that alone, and that includes you. Emma's heart clenched at his words. She had spent so much of her life believing she had to be strong on her own, that no one would ever care enough to stay. But here was this man, this brilliant, successful, kind man, telling her she didn't have to. Her eyes burned with unshed tears. Thank you, she whispered. Adrian's hand briefly tightened on the wheel. Anytime, Emma, and for the first time in a long time, she believed him. A night of restlessness. When they finally arrived at her small apartment, Emma hesitated before stepping out. She turned to Adrian, chewing on her lip. Would you like to come in for coffee? His eyes darkened slightly, and for a split second, something flickered between them, something dangerous, something intoxicating. But then, he smiled. Not tonight. Emma swallowed, disappointed, but also relieved. Get some rest, Adrian murmured. I'll call you tomorrow about the ultrasound. She nodded slowly. Good night, Adrian. He smiled. Good night, Emma. As she stepped into her apartment, her heart still racing, she realized something terrifying. She was falling for him, and she had no idea how to stop it. The night had been long, filled with restless thoughts, but Emma somehow managed to sleep. Yet, as the morning sun peeked through her small apartment window, she woke with a strange mix of nervousness and anticipation. Today was the day of her ultrasound. Her mind replayed the events of last night, Adrian's words, his presence, the way his deep, soothing voice had calmed her when she was on the verge of panic. He had been so kind, so protective, and that scared her more than anything. She had never had someone care for her like that. Shaking off the thoughts, Emma took a deep breath and got ready. She chose a simple, modest dress, tied her hair back, and avoided looking at herself too much in the mirror. She wasn't the kind of girlman like Adrian Blackwood noticed, and yet here she was, about to meet him again. The hospital visit. Emma's fingers trembled slightly as she pushed open the hospital door. The scent of antiseptic filled the air, the cool atmosphere of the clinic making her shiver slightly. The receptionist gave her a warm smile. Dr. Blackwood is expecting you, Miss Carter. You can go right in. Emma nodded, clutching her purse tighter as she made her way down the hallway. Her heart pounded as she reached the familiar office door. Taking a shaky breath, she knocked softly. Come in. She pushed open the door, and there he was, standing by his desk, flipping through a medical file. Adrian looked up as she entered, and for a moment, his deep blue eyes softened. You came, he said, his voice gentle. Emma swallowed. You asked me to. He smiled slightly, closing the file and gesturing toward the examination table. I'm glad. Are you ready? Was she? No, but she nodded anyway. The ultrasound. A moment of vulnerability. Emma lay on the examination table, her heart hammering against her ribs as Adrian adjusted the ultrasound machine. The gel was cool against her skin, and she shivered slightly. Adrian's touch was warm, steady, as he guided the probe over her lower abdomen. Take a deep breath, he murmured. She did, and then the screen flickered to life. Emma turned her head slightly, her throat tightening as she stared at the black and white image. Adrian's brows furrowed slightly as he focused on the screen. He was silent for a few moments, his expression unreadable. Emma's anxiety spiked. What is it? He glanced at her, his blue eyes serious, but not unkind. It's what I suspected. There's a cyst, but it's not as severe as I initially feared. Her breath hitched. Does that mean I don't need surgery? Adrian hesitated. Not necessarily. It depends on how it progresses. But for now, we can try medication and monitor it. Emma's chest tightened, her eyes stinging with emotion. She had been so terrified of the idea of surgery, of being alone through it all. And now there was hope. She let out a shaky breath. Thank you. Adrian watched her carefully. His gaze wasn't just that of a doctor looking at a patient. It was deeper, more personal. You don't have to thank me, Emma, he said softly. I told you, I won't let you go through this alone. Her eyes met his, and for the first time in a long time, she let herself believe that. Alright, that feels different. After the ultrasound, Emma gathered her things, still feeling slightly dazed. Adrian walked her to the hospital exit, his hands casually in his pockets. I can drive you home again, he offered. Emma hesitated. Last night had been one thing, but was it really okay for him to do this again? She should say no, she should, but instead, she found herself nodding. The drive was quiet at first, a comfortable silence settling between them. But then, Adrian broke it. You seemed really scared back there, he said, glancing at her. Did you think it was something worse? Emma bit her lip. I've always been afraid of doctors, hospitals, the idea of being weak in front of people. Adrian's hands tightened slightly on the wheel. Being vulnerable doesn't make you weak, Emma, she swallowed. I know, but it feels like it does. Adrian was silent for a moment, then he sighed. You remind me so much of my sister. Emma turned to him. You said that before. How so? She was stubborn, he admitted, with a small smile, always acting like she didn't need help, even when she did. Emma lowered her gaze. Maybe she didn't want to be a burden. Adrian's jaw clenched. She wasn't, and neither are you.
Emma felt her heart twist. She had never had anyone say that to her before. She had spent her whole life believing that needing someone meant being a weight on them. And here, Adrian was effortlessly shattering that belief. The moment that changed everything. When they reached Emma's apartment, she hesitated before getting out. Adrian watched her, something unreadable in his gaze. Emma, she turned to him. Yes, he hesitated for a fraction of a second. Then, he reached out and brushed a stray strand of hair from her face. Emma froze. His fingers were warm, gentle, lingering for just a second too long. Her breath caught in her throat, her pulse pounding. Adrian seemed to realize what he had done, because he pulled back slightly, exhaling as if trying to compose himself. He stopped himself, shaking his head with a small smile. Never mind. Get some rest. Emma's heart was still racing. Good night, Adrian. He gave her one last lingering look. Good night, Emma. And as she stepped inside, closing the door behind her, she leaned against it, her hands pressed to her chest, because in that one simple touch, in that single moment of hesitation, she knew she was in trouble. Because Adrian Blackwood wasn't just her doctor anymore. He was something more, something dangerous, something she wasn't sure she could resist. The air inside Emma's tiny apartment felt heavier than usual. She leaned against the door, her heart still racing from the way Adrian had touched her. Just a fleeting caress, but it had ignited something deep inside her, something unfamiliar. Why did it feel so different? Why did he feel so different? Emma shook her head, pressing her hands against her warm cheeks. No. Stop it. He's just being kind. You're overthinking everything. And yet, she couldn't shake the feeling that Adrian Blackwood saw her in a way no one else ever had. An unexpected visitor. Emma had barely changed into her nightdress when a soft knock on the door startled her. Her brows furrowed. It was late. Who could it be? Heart pounding, she hesitated before unlocking it. And there he was. Adrian, still in his black button-up shirt, sleeves rolled up, looking as devastatingly handsome as ever. His deep blue eyes held something intense, something unreadable. Emma's throat went dry. Adrian, he exhaled sharply, running a hand through his tousled hair. Her fingers tightened around the door. Then why are you? For a moment, he just stared at her, as if trying to figure out the answer himself. Then with a sigh, he leaned against the door frame, his gaze never leaving hers. Because I can't stop thinking about you. Emma's breath hitched. What? She whispered. Adrian let out a bitter chuckle, shaking his head. This wasn't supposed to happen. You were supposed to be just another patient. But every time I see you, every time I talk to you, I feel like I'm losing control. Emma's hands trembled. I don't understand. Adrian's jaw tightened. I shouldn't feel this way about you, Emma. Her heart pounded painfully against her ribs. Was she dreaming? Was she imagining all of this? But no, this was real. Adrian Blackwood, the man who had saved her, who had looked at her with such gentle concern, who had made her heart race with just a single touch, was standing here, confessing something she had never dared to hope for. You don't have to say anything, Adrian murmured, his voice rough. I needed you to know. Emma swallowed, her pulse racing. You feel something for me. Adrian's gaze darkened. More than I should. The silence between them was thick, charged with something neither of them dared to name. Emma's mind screamed at her to say something, anything, but her body refused to move, her lips refusing to form words. Adrian took a step closer, closing the distance between them. His fingers lightly brushed against her wrist, sending shivers up her spine. I know I'm your doctor, he said, his voice low, intimate. I know there are rules, but tell me, Emma, if things were different, if I wasn't your doctor, would you feel it too? Her chest ached with something she didn't understand. She had spent her entire life keeping her walls up, guarding her heart, but Adrian, he was breaking through them so effortlessly. Emma's lips parted. I don't know. Adrian searched her face, his expression unreadable. Then with a slow measured breath, he took a step back. I won't push you, he said quietly, but I need you to know. I don't think I can walk away from this. Emma felt something deep inside her crack, because she wasn't sure she could either. The night of restless hearts, Emma barely slept. She tossed and turned, Adrian's words replaying in her mind over and over. I can't stop thinking about you, more than I should. I don't think I can walk away from this. Her fingers curled into the sheets. How was she supposed to act normal after this? How was she supposed to face him, knowing that he felt the same pull she did? She had convinced herself that what she felt for Adrian was one-sided, that he was simply being kind, that she was foolish for thinking otherwise. But now, everything was different, and it terrified her. The coffee shop meeting the next morning, Emma found herself staring at her phone, a message from Adrian flashing on the screen. Adrian, can we meet for coffee? Her heart lurched. Was this a mistake? Should she even go? But deep down, she already knew the answer. When she arrived at the quiet little coffee shop, Adrian was already there, seated at a corner table. He looked up as she approached, his expression unreadable, but something flickered in his eyes. Relief. Hey, he said softly. Emma sat down,
trying to steady her breath. Hi. They sat in silence for a moment, the air between them heavy with unspoken words. Finally, Adrian sighed. About last night, I don't regret it, Emma blurted out. His eyes widened slightly. She swallowed hard, looking down at her hands. I don't know what this is between us. I don't know if it's right or wrong. But, I don't regret hearing what you said. Adrian's jaw tensed. Emma. She looked up at him then, her heart pounding. I don't know how to do this. I don't know how to let someone care about me. But she hesitated, her fingers twisting in her lap. Adrian leaned forward slightly, his voice gentle. But what? Her throat tightened. I think I might be falling for you. The moment the words left her lips, a flicker of something intense passed through Adrian's gaze. And then, before she could second-guess herself, he reached across the table, his hand closing over hers. The warmth of his touch sent a shiver up her spine. You don't have to be afraid, he murmured. We'll figure this out, together. And for the first time in her life, Emma wanted to believe him, because maybe, just maybe, she wasn't alone anymore. The moment hung between them, delicate yet electric. Emma could feel the warmth of Adrian's hand over hers, his touch firm but gentle, as if he was afraid she might slip away. She swallowed hard, her heart hammering in her chest. Had she really just said that? Had she really just told him that she was falling for him? Adrian's deep blue eyes searched hers, as if trying to confirm what he had just heard. Then slowly, his fingers tightened around hers. Emma. His voice was barely a whisper, rough and full of unspoken emotions. She couldn't look away. The world outside the coffee shop faded. The noise of people, the clinking of cups, the scent of freshly brewed espresso, none of it mattered. All that mattered was him. But the man who had saved her, the man who had seen her pain when no one else had, the man who had made her heart race in ways she had never felt before. Emma felt breathless under his gaze. I don't know what to do with these feelings, Adrian. His thumb traced slow, soothing circles over the back of her hand. You don't have to do anything. She bit her lip. But I'm scared. His grip tightened, as if reassuring her. Of what? Her throat tightened. Of getting hurt. Of this being a mistake. Of she exhaled shakily. Of you walking away. A shadow passed through Adrian's eyes, as if the very idea of leaving her hurt him. I'm not going anywhere, Emma, he said, his voice steady. The sincerity in his tone sent a shiver down her spine. And then, before she could second-guess herself, before she could let the fear consume her again, Adrian moved. His hand reached up, fingertips grazing her jaw, tilting her chin up ever so slightly. Emma's breath caught in her throat. His face was so close now. She could see the way his lashes framed his striking eyes, the way his lips parted slightly, as if waiting, giving her the choice to pull away. But she didn't. She couldn't. Instead, she closed the distance between them. The moment their lips met, a shock of warmth spread through Emma's body. Adrian kissed her softly, at first tentative, testing, as if he was afraid she might run. But when she didn't, when she responded to him with just as much urgency, he deepened the kiss. His fingers tangled in her hair, pulling her closer. The world around them disappeared completely, leaving only the rhythm of their breaths, the heat between them, the way their hearts pounded in sync. Emma felt something inside her break free, something she had kept locked away for too long. She melted against him, her fingers gripping the front of his shirt, as if anchoring herself to the moment. She had never been kissed like this before, never been held like this before. Adrian kissed her, like she was something precious, something fragile and fierce, all at once, like he had been waiting for this moment, just as long as she had. And when they finally pulled away, breathless foreheads touching, everything had changed. A night full of unspoken promises. Adrian exhaled slowly, his forehead resting against hers. Tell me you don't regret that, he murmured. Emma shook her head, her fingers still fisted in his shirt. I don't. His lips curled into the faintest smile. Good, because I've wanted to do that since the first moment I saw you. Her cheeks burned. You have. Adrian let out a soft chuckle, tucking a strand of hair behind her ear. I fought it. I told myself it was wrong, that I needed to stay professional, but I couldn't stop thinking about you, Emma. She bit her lip, her heart swelling at his words, because she felt the same way. She had spent so much time convincing herself that she wasn't worthy of someone like him, that someone like him could never truly see someone like her. But Adrian did see her, and he wanted her. Emma's fingers trembled slightly as she traced the buttons of his shirt. What happens now? Adrian's gaze softened, his thumb brushing against her cheek. Now, we take this one step at a time. She nodded, her heart still pounding. She didn't know what the future held. She didn't know where this would lead. But in this moment, right here, right now, she knew one thing for certain. She was falling for Adrian Blackwood, and maybe, just maybe, he was falling for her too. The days following their first kiss were unlike anything Emma had ever experienced before. Everything felt new. Every touch, every glance, every lingering moment between them held an unspoken promise. Adrian wasn't just her doctor anymore. He wasn't just the man who had saved her. He was the man who had stolen her heart, and she could feel deep in her bones that she had stolen his too. A night under the stars. One evening, Adrian invited her to his private estate outside the city. The night was warm, the sky a blanket of stars, and the sound of waves crashing against the shore echoed in the distance. Emma stood on the balcony of his luxurious home, gazing out at the breathtaking view. She had never been anywhere like this before. The world Adrian lived in was so different from hers, so elegant, so effortless. Yet, when he stood beside her, looking at her, as if she was the most beautiful thing he had ever seen, she didn't feel out of place. She felt like she belonged. Adrian appeared behind her, wrapping a soft shawl around her shoulders. "You're cold," he murmured, his breath warm against her ear. Emma smiled, leaning into his touch. A little, his arms circled her waist, pulling her back against his chest. "Better." She swallowed hard, her pulse quickening. "Much better." They stood like that for a while, wrapped in each other's warmth, the world around them fading into a quiet hum. Then softly, Adrian whispered, "Emma, do you believe in fate?" She turned to face him, their eyes locking in the dim light. "I don't know. I never thought about it much." His fingers traced the curve of her jaw. "I used to think love was something I could control, that if I focused on my work, on my career, I wouldn't need anything else." Emma's heart pounded. "And now?" Adrian smiled, his lips brushing against her forehead. "And now, I'm not so sure." Her breath hitched, because she knew what he meant. She felt it too, the pull, the undeniable force drawing them closer. Adrian tilted her chin up, his gaze dark and intense. "You've changed everything for me, Emma," she exhaled shakily. "You've changed everything for me too." And then he kissed her, deeply, passionately, as if he was claiming her, as if he never wanted to let her go. Emma melted into him, her hands gripping his shirt, her entire body aching for more. But just as the moment deepened, just as she felt herself surrendering completely, a sudden ringing sound shattered the air. Adrian stiffened. Emma pulled back, breathless. "Your phone," he cursed under his breath, running a hand through his hair, before pulling the phone from his pocket. His face darkened the moment he saw the screen. Emma noticed the change instantly. "Who is it?" Adrian hesitated. Then with a clenched jaw, he answered the call. "Hello." Emma watched as his expression hardened, his free hand balling into a fist. His voice dropped to a low, sharp tone. "Now is not the time, Victoria." Victoria. The name sent a shiver down Emma's spine. She stepped back slightly, a strange unease creeping into her chest. Who was Victoria? And why did Adrian look furious? He ended the call abruptly, shoving his phone back into his pocket. Emma bit her lip, trying to push down the nervous flutter in her stomach. "Who was that?" Adrian exhaled, running a hand through his hair. No one important. But Emma wasn't stupid. She saw the tension in his shoulders, the way his jaw was clenched tight, the way his entire mood had shifted in an instant. No one important, she repeated softly. Then why do you look like you're about to punch a wall? Adrian let out a slow breath, his gaze dark with frustration. It's my past, something I thought I had left behind. Emma's chest tightened. Your past? Adrian hesitated, as if debating whether to tell her the truth. Then, after a long pause, he finally said, she's my ex-fiancée. Emma's heart dropped. She had never expected that. Ex-fiancée. The words echoed in her mind like a distant thunderstorm. For the first time since she had met Adrian, since she had started falling for him, she felt something cold creep into her veins. Doubt. The first crack in their love. The night that had started as something magical now felt different. The stars didn't seem as bright. The warmth of Adrian's arms didn't feel as secure. Emma tried to shake off the feeling, but she couldn't. As much as she wanted to trust him, as much as she wanted to believe that this wouldn't change things, she couldn't stop the question that burned in her mind. Was she just another woman in his life, another chapter in his story, or was she something more? Adrian reached for her hand, his touch warm and reassuring. Emma, don't let this ruin what we have. She swallowed hard, forcing a smile. I won't. But deep down, she knew this was just the beginning of something she wasn't ready for, and she wasn't sure if her heart could survive it. The silence between Emma and Adrian stretched like a fragile thread, ready to snap at any moment. After Adrian revealed that Victoria was his ex-fiancée, Emma couldn't stop the flood of emotions swirling inside her. Doubt, insecurity, a strange painful ache in her chest that she didn't know how to name. She had never been in love before, never had someone look at her the way Adrian did. But now, she couldn't help but wonder, was she just another woman in his life, another name to be forgotten when things got complicated, the ghost of a love once lost? The next day, Adrian was distant, not in the way that lovers drift apart, but in the way a man builds a wall around himself to protect the woman he cares about. Emma noticed it immediately. The way his hands hesitated before touching her, the way his kisses were still passionate, but tinged with something else, a quiet turmoil, an invisible battle raging inside him. She wanted to ask him, she wanted to demand answers, but before she could, the past arrived at their doorstep. Victoria's return. Emma was at the hospital, waiting for Adrian in his office. She was flipping through a book absent-mindedly, when the door suddenly swung open, and a woman walked in, tall, elegant, with striking features, and the confidence of someone who had never known rejection. Emma froze. She knew, she just knew, this was Victoria. Victoria's sharp eyes landed on Emma, and for a brief moment, she seemed surprised, perhaps even amused. So, she said, her voice like silk laced with poison, you must be her. Emma swallowed. And you must be Victoria. Victoria smirked. He told you about me. How interesting. Emma stood, trying to keep her voice steady. What do you want? Victoria took a slow step forward. I want what's mine, she said, her gaze unwavering. And Adrian was mine long before you came along. A cold shiver ran down Emma's spine. She had known Adrian had a past, but she never expected the past to walk in like a storm, ready to destroy everything in its path. A heart divided. When Adrian finally arrived, he immediately sensed the tension in the room. His eyes darted between Emma and Victoria, his expression darkening. What are you doing here, Victoria? He asked, his voice sharp. Victoria turned to him with a sweet, knowing smile. Oh darling, do I really need a reason? Emma felt something inside her crack. Darling. The word tasted like poison in her ears. Adrian's jaw clenched. Whatever you think is still between us, it's over. Victoria sighed dramatically. Is it? Because I remember a time when you promised me forever. Emma felt like she couldn't breathe. Adrian ran a frustrated hand through his hair. That was a lifetime ago. Victoria's smirk didn't waver. I don't think so. and I doubt she thinks so either. She turned to Emma, her gaze sharp. Tell me, dear, does he still say I don't believe in love? Or did he make an exception for you? Emma's heart pounded. She had heard those words before. Adrian had once told her that he never believed in love, that he had always thought emotions were nothing but distractions. Had that been because of her? Had Victoria been the one to make him believe that love was useless? Emma suddenly felt small, like she was standing on the edge of something dangerous, something that could break her completely if she wasn't careful. I don't need to prove anything to you, Emma finally said, her voice quiet but firm. Victoria tilted her head, amusement flickering in her eyes. We'll see about that. And with that she turned and walked out, leaving behind an air of chaos that neither Emma nor Adrian knew how to fix. When doubt creeps in that night, Emma couldn't sleep. She lay in bed staring at the ceiling, her thoughts a mess. Adrian hadn't mentioned Victoria again after she left. He had tried to distract Emma with soft kisses and whispered reassurances, but she could feel it. Something had changed. The seed of doubt had been planted, and Emma didn't know if their love was strong enough to survive it. As she turned onto her side, she felt Adrian shift beside her, his arm wrapped around her waist, pulling her close. You're thinking too much, he murmured against her skin. She hesitated. Then finally she whispered, Adrian, do you still love her? His entire body went still. Then slowly he turned her to face him, his dark eyes filled with something unreadable. No, he said, I love you. Emma wanted to believe him, but in the darkness of the night, Victoria's words echoed in her mind. I want what's mine. And Emma couldn't help but wonder, would Adrian always be hers, or would the past steal him away? The silence in the room felt suffocating. Emma lay in Adrian's arms, but her heart was restless. His words echoed in her mind. No, I love you. She wanted to believe him, but doubts whispered in the darkest corners of her heart. Victoria's presence had reopened wounds Emma never knew existed. She wasn't just fighting Adrian's past, she was fighting her own insecurities. Was she enough for a man like him? Would she ever truly belong in his world? Adrian's hand tightened around her waist, as if sensing her distress. He leaned down, pressing a soft kiss to her forehead. Stop overthinking, sweetheart, he murmured. You're mine, and I'm yours. Emma swallowed hard. Then why do I feel like I'm fighting for a place in your life? Adrian stiffened. A moment of silence passed before he whispered, because you don't trust me yet. Her breath caught in her throat. Did she? A morning full of uncertainty. The next morning, Emma woke up alone. Adrian had left early for the hospital. A short note on his pillow. Didn't want to wake you. I love you. She traced her fingers over the words, but they didn't bring her comfort. She needed answers. She needed to know where she truly stood in his life, and there was only one way to find out. A face-to-face confrontation. Emma arrived at the hospital with her heart pounding in her chest. She knew where Adrian's office was, and she knew exactly where she needed to go. But as she turned the corner, she stopped in her tracks. Victoria was already there, sitting across from Adrian, laughing softly, as if they were old lovers reminiscing about their past. Something inside Emma twisted painfully. For a moment she felt paralyzed. She wasn't ready for this, but she had no choice. Taking a deep breath, she pushed the door open. Adrian's head snapped up instantly. A flicker of surprise crossed his face, then concern. Emma, but Victoria spoke first. Well, look who decided to join us. Emma clenched her fists. What are you doing here, Victoria? Victoria smirked, her gaze flickering toward Adrian. We were just catching up. Emma turned to Adrian, her voice trembling slightly. And you let her? Adrian sighed, running a hand through his hair. She showed up unannounced. I was just what? Emma cut in. Entertaining your past, while I sit at home wondering where I stand in your life. A flicker of frustration crossed Adrian's face. Emma, don't do this here. But she had already reached her breaking point. Why not? Is it because she's here? Emma's voice wavered, but she refused to back down. Tell me, Adrian, do you really love me? Or am I just a replacement for the woman you lost? The room fell into heavy silence. Adrian's expression darkened. Victoria, looking amused, leaned back in her chair. Now this is getting interesting. Adrian shot her a glare. Leave. Victoria raised an eyebrow. Excuse me. Adrian's voice was cold, firm. I said leave. For the first time Victoria seemed taken aback. But then she smirked, standing gracefully. Fine. But don't forget, Adrian, you and I have unfinished business. She brushed past Emma, pausing only to whisper, he might love you now, but I'll always be his first. And then she was gone, leaving behind a storm neither Emma nor Adrian knew how to navigate.
A love on the edge. Emma turned to Adrian, her heart hammering in her chest. You need to tell me the truth, she said, her voice raw. Did you ever love her? Adrian hesitated. That hesitation felt like a knife to her heart. I thought I did, he admitted. But what I had with her, it was never real. It was built on expectations, not love. Emma's breath caught. And what about me? Adrian stepped forward, cupping her face in his hands. You, he exhaled sharply. You are real. You're the only thing that has ever felt real. Did Emma wanted to believe him? She wanted to hold on to him and never let go. To Bettiori's words still lingered. I'll always be his first. And no matter how much Adrian loved her, Emma couldn't shake the fear. What if first love never truly fades? Did Emma stood frozen, her breath uneven, her heart racing. Adrian's hands were still cupping her face, his deep brown eyes searching hers with desperation. You're the only one I've ever truly loved, he repeated, but Emma's thoughts were drowning in uncertainty. I'll always be his first. Victoria's voice echoed in her mind, planting doubts she couldn't ignore. Would Adrian always see her as the woman who came after? Would she always be living in the shadow of someone else? Tears burned in her eyes. She wanted to believe him. She wanted to trust him, but trust wasn't given. It was built, and right now, hers was crumbling. She pulled away, her voice barely above a whisper. I need time, Adrian. His face fell. Time. Emma swallowed hard, nodding. I can't do this. Not when I don't even know where I stand in your life. Did Adrian's jaw tightened. You stand right here. He reached for her hands. With me. Always. Her hands trembled in his grasp. Then prove it, she whispered. A storm raged in Adrian's eyes. How? Emma hesitated, searching for words. I don't want to be a replacement, to be second to anyone. I need to know that when you look at me, you're not just trying to forget her. Adrian exhaled sharply, running a frustrated hand through his hair. Emma, I'm not breaking up with you, she cut in. I just need space to figure things out. His entire body stiffened. Space. Emma nodded. I need to clear my head. Silence. A long, painful silence. Then Adrian took a step back, his eyes dark with emotion. If space is what you need, I'll give it to you. Emma's chest tightened. She had expected him to fight, to beg her to stay, but he didn't. Instead, he simply nodded, his expression unreadable. Take all the time you need. And with that, he walked away, leaving Emma standing in the middle of his office, her heart aching in ways she never imagined. That empty apartment, a heavy heart. That night, Emma returned to her small apartment. For the first time in months, she was alone. No Adrian, no warm arms pulling her close in the middle of the night, just silence. She curled up on the couch, hugging her knees to her chest. Had she made a mistake? Had she just pushed away the only man who ever truly cared for her? Her phone buzzed. A message from Adrian. Adrian, I hope you're okay. Just wanted you to know that no matter what, I love you. Sleep well, sweetheart. Tears spilled down her cheeks. She wanted to reply, to tell him she loved him too. But she didn't. Because love wasn't enough. Not when fear still had a hold on her heart. A grand gesture. Days passed. Then a week. Emma missed Adrian so much it hurt. She tried to focus on work, but nothing felt right. Her heart wasn't in it. Her heart was still with him. Then one evening, as she stepped out of the hospital, she found something waiting for her. A single red rose, and a note. Meet me where it all began. Her heart pounded. She knew exactly where that was. The park. The same park where she had first met Adrian. Where he had found her crying on that cold bench. Where he had unknowingly changed her life forever. Without hesitation she grabbed a taxi and headed there. Love, without doubt. The park was empty, except for one man, Adrian, standing under the dim glow of a street lamp, holding another red rose. Emma's breath hitched. He looked different, vulnerable, hopeful, terrified. She stepped forward, her voice barely above a whisper. You remembered. He gave her a small smile. How could I forget? Silence stretched between them. Then Adrian took a deep breath. I let you go because I wanted you to have the space you needed, he said. But not a second passed where I didn't want to fight for you. Emma swallowed hard. Adrian, I love you, he interrupted. Not because you're my second chance. Not because I need to replace Victoria. But because you're you, and I don't want to spend another day apart. Emma's chest tightened. Every word felt like a balm to her aching heart. I don't need space anymore, she whispered. Adrian stepped closer. No, she shook her head. I just need you. Adrian exhaled, a mix of relief and love flashing in his eyes. And then, without hesitation, he pulled her into his arms. Their lips met in a kiss that spoke of longing, of forgiveness, of love. A kiss that sealed their future. A kiss that finally erased every doubt. This wasn't a second-place kind of love. This was real, and it was forever. The night air was crisp, carrying the scent of fresh roses from the nearby garden. Emma was still wrapped in Adrian's arms, her head resting against his chest, feeling the rhythmic beating of his heart. It was fast, just like hers. Their kiss had been filled with longing, sealing away every doubt, every insecurity. She closed her eyes, letting herself get lost in the moment. I never want to let you go again, Adrian whispered, his lips brushing against her forehead. Emma smiled softly. Then don't. He pulled back just enough to look into her eyes. Come with me. Emma frowned playfully. Where? Adrian smirked. You'll see. A night to remember. Adrian led Emma to his sleek black car, opening the door for her like a true gentleman. The way he looked at her made her heart flutter. She had missed him. Missed this. The car ride was silent yet filled with unspoken emotions. He held her hand the entire way, his thumb tracing soft circles on her skin. When they arrived, Emma's breath hitched. It was the rooftop of Adrian's penthouse. But something was different. Hundreds of fairy lights twinkled like stars above them. The entire place was transformed into a dreamlike wonderland. Candles, red rose petals, and soft instrumental music playing in the background. A beautifully set table stood at the center, adorned with fine china and champagne glasses. Emma's heart pounded. Adrian, this is perfect, he asked, grinning. She turned to him, overwhelmed. You did all this for me. For us, he corrected, taking her hands in his. A waiter appeared, serving a delicious gourmet meal. But Emma could barely focus on the food. Her mind was spinning, her heart racing. Adrian watched her with admiration. You have no idea how beautiful you look right now. Emma blushed. You're just saying that. I've never just said anything when it comes to you. His sincerity made her chest tighten. Adrian, why are you doing all this?
she asked softly. He took a deep breath, his eyes dark with emotion. Because I have something important to ask you. Emma froze. Adrian stood up, pulling her gently to her feet. Then in one fluid motion, he sank to one knee. A proposal from the heart. Emma's breath caught in her throat. She couldn't move, couldn't blink. Her hands flew to her mouth as she watched Adrian pull out a small velvet box from his pocket and open it. Inside was a stunning diamond ring, shimmering under the golden lights. Tears welled in her eyes. Emma, Adrian began, his voice filled with love. From the moment I met you, my life has never been the same. You came into my world like a quiet storm, and before I knew it, you had captured my heart completely. Emma's vision blurred. He continued, you are the first thing I think about when I wake up, and the last thing on my mind before I sleep. You've shown me what true love is. Not perfection, not a fairy tale, but something real, something worth fighting for. A tear slipped down Emma's cheek. Adrian reached for her hand, his own trembling. I don't want a life where you're not by my side. I don't want to wake up in a world where I can't hold you, laugh with you. He exhaled shakily. So Emma Hayes, will you marry me? Emma let out a soft broken laugh through her tears. Yes, she whispered, her voice trembling. Yes, Adrian. 1,000 times yes. Cheers erupted from behind them as the staff clapped excitedly. But Emma only saw him. Adrian slid the ring onto her finger and stood up, pulling her into the most passionate kiss of their lives. Her hands tangled in his hair, his arms wrapped around her waist. In that moment, nothing else mattered, just them, just love, just forever. The day had arrived. Emma stood before the full-length mirror, barely recognizing the woman staring back at her. Her wedding dress was breathtaking, an elegant white gown with delicate lace detailing, and a flowing train. Her hair cascaded in soft waves, a jeweled tiara resting atop her head. Her heart pounded as she touched the diamond ring on her finger. She was about to become Adrian Knight's wife. A gentle knock at the door pulled her out of her thoughts. Come in, she called softly. The door opened, and Olivia, her best friend, walked in with misty eyes. Oh, Emma, you look like a dream, she whispered. Emma laughed nervously. A very anxious dream. Olivia took her hands. You love him. He loves you. That's all that matters. Emma nodded, inhaling deeply. Yes, that was all that mattered. A soft voice called from outside. It's time. A vow of forever. The grand cathedral was filled with the scent of fresh roses, the aisle lined with flickering candles. Every seat was occupied by guests who had come to witness their love story's most beautiful chapter. At the altar, Adrian stood in an impeccably tailored black tuxedo. His hands were clasped in front of him, but his eyes were locked on Emma as she walked toward him. His heart pounded. She was breathtaking. As Emma walked down the aisle, her hands trembled, but the moment their eyes met, everything melted away. It was just them. Reaching the altar, Adrian took her hands gently, his fingers brushing over her skin in reassurance. The priest began the ceremony, but all Emma could focus on was Adrian. Then came the vows. Adrian's voice was deep and steady. Emma, before you my life was full of success but empty of meaning. You changed everything. You showed me love that is raw, real, and everlasting. I promise to stand by your side, to cherish you, to love you fiercely, through every storm and every joy. Emma swallowed the lump in her throat as she spoke. Adrian, I was never the girl who believed in fairy tales. Until you. You showed me what love truly is, not just in words but in actions. I promise to love you, to trust you, to walk beside you, always. Tears shimmered in Adrian's eyes. The priest smiled. By the power vested in me, I now pronounce you husband and wife. Adrian wasted no time. He cupped Emma's face, tilting her head back, and kissed her deeply. A kiss filled with passion, love and the promise of forever. The crowd erupted in cheers, but they barely heard it. They had found their forever in each other. Epilogue. A new beginning. Months later, Emma stood on the balcony of their honeymoon villa, overlooking the serene ocean. Warm arms wrapped around her from behind. Adrian pressed a kiss to her shoulder. "Mrs. Knight, are you happy?" She turned in his embrace, smiling. "Happier than I ever thought possible." He kissed her softly, then whispered, "Then I have one more surprise for you." Emma raised a brow. "What kind of surprise?" Adrian placed a hand gently on her stomach. Her eyes widened. "How did you? I had a feeling." He chuckled. "And I was right, wasn't I?" Emma's eyes filled with tears. She nodded. Adrian pulled her into his arms. "You've given me everything, Emma. A love I never knew I needed. And now, a family." As they stood there, wrapped in each other's arms, the ocean breeze carrying the scent of salt and roses, Emma knew this was only the beginning of their forever.